A rich cowboy used twins to test mail-order brides, acted poor, then she did this. On the dusty edge of the frontier, a wealthy rancher hides his fortune and takes two mischievous twins into a broken-down shack. Every bride that comes knocking, he tests their patience, their grit, and their heart. But then, one schoolteacher steps off the stagecoach. She doesn't flinch at hunger. She doesn't run from hard work. She kneels with the twins, sings scripture by lamplight, and carries secrets more dangerous than any storm rolling across the plains. Because a railroad agent is hunting her, and when his boots strike the church floor, the whole town feels the ground shake. Now the cowboy's greatest lie collides with her greatest fear. Will his disguise cost him the only woman who ever loved him for more than money, or will the truth set them all free? What happens when a test of love turns into a battle for faith, family, and survival? This channel isn't just about stories, it's about remembering what still holds value: empathy, truth, and the courage to care. The setting sun painted long shadows across the Colorado plains, turning the grass to rippling gold. Inside his sprawling ranch house, Colton Hayes settled into his favorite leather chair by the crackling fire. His weathered Bible lay open in his lap, but his thoughts wandered far from the familiar verses. The flames danced before him as he pondered his situation. Though his cattle operation had grown mighty prosperous, success meant little without someone to share it. The house felt too big, too quiet, despite the wealth that filled it. The soft leather of his chair creaked as he shifted, his gaze drifting to the stack of letters on the nearby table. Each envelope contained hopes and promises from women seeking to be mail-order brides. Some wrote of their cooking skills, others of their gentle dispositions, but how many truly sought a partner, not just a wealthy husband? The thunder of small feet broke his brooding. Ben and Susanna burst into the room, their 8-year-old energy filling the space with life. "Uncle Colton," Ben called out, his dark hair tousled from play. "Susanna won't give back my wooden horse." "You said I could borrow it," Susanna protested, clutching the toy to her chest. Her eyes, so like her mother's, brimmed with stubborn tears. Colton set aside his Bible and opened his arms. Both children scrambled onto his lap, their familiar weight, comfort, and burden both. Since their mother, his dear sister, had passed, he'd done his best to raise them. But watching Susanna smooth her doll's dress, or Ben try to tie his neckerchief, their need for a mother's touch was clear as day. Now, he soothed. There's room enough for sharing. As the twins settled, a plan began forming in his mind. He glanced again at the letters, then back to the children's expectant faces. "How would you two like to play a special game?" he asked, his voice low and conspiratorial. Ben perked up immediately. "What kind of game?" "Well," Colton paused, choosing his words carefully. "You know how I've been writing to find us a new mama?" Susanna nodded solemnly, while Ben squirmed with interest. "I reckon we ought to make sure whoever comes loves us for who we are, not what we own." He gestured around the well-furnished room. "So we'll pretend to be poor folks, living in the line shack down by the creek." The twins' eyes widened with excitement. "Like playing dress-up?" Susanna asked, already warming to the idea. "That's right, sweetheart. We'll need to keep it a secret that we really live here in the big house." Colton tapped his chin thoughtfully. "Think you can manage that?" Ben bounced on his knee. "Can I wear my old patched breeches, the ones Sally says aren't fit for Sunday meeting?" "Perfect for the part," Colton agreed, ruffling the boy's hair. "But mind you both, not a word about the ranch hands or the cattle operation or this fine house. As far as our visitor knows, we're just simple folk getting by." The children giggled, already plotting their roles in the grand deception. Susanna twirled, her calico skirt flaring. "I'll wear my plain dress, the one without the lace." "And I won't wash behind my ears," Ben declared, earning a stern look from his uncle. Now, we're playing poor, not slovenly," Colton corrected, though he couldn't help but smile at their enthusiasm. After tucking the twins into bed that night, Colton returned to his desk. The lamp cast a warm glow as he pulled out fresh paper and his good pen. He'd already chosen which letter to answer, the one from the schoolteacher in Boston. Her words had seemed sincere, speaking more of family and faith than fortune. His pen scratched across the paper as he composed his response, carefully crafting the image of a humble rancher with modest means. He included directions to the stage stop and mentioned he'd meet her there in a month's time. Not once did he hint at the true extent of his holdings. The letter complete, Colton sealed it with wax and set it aside for mailing. Leaning back in his chair, he gazed out the window at the star-filled sky. "Lord," he whispered, "let her heart be true." The gentle tick of the mantel clock and pop of settling logs in the fireplace filled the quiet room. Tomorrow would bring another busy day of ranch work, but tonight hope stirred in his heart. Perhaps this plan would help him find a genuine partner, someone to love him, the twins, and their simple life, whether rich or poor. Outside, a coyote's lonely call echoed across the prairie, reminding him of his own solitude. But for the first time in a long while, Colton Hayes smiled at the sound, knowing that soon enough, if God was willing, that loneliness might finally end. Morning brought a crisp breeze across the Colorado plains, carrying the sweet scent of meadow grass. Colton Hayes stood in his barn, loading supplies into the old wagon. Rough burlap sacks of beans and flour thumped against the wooden bed, followed by cast-iron cookware that had seen better days. "Uncle Colton," Ben's voice rang out as he dragged a patchwork quilt across the yard, one corner trailing in the dirt. "Can we bring Mama's quilts to the line shack?" "Careful with those, young man," Colton called, reaching down to help Ben lift the bedding. "And yes, they'll do fine for our game. Simple folk take pride in their quilts, same as anyone." Susanna appeared in the barn doorway, her arms full of worn clothing. "I found our old things in the trunk," she announced proudly. "Even that dress with the patch on the sleeve." Colton smiled at her enthusiasm while securing the quilts under a length of rope. "That's perfect, sweetheart. Remember now, we're not just playing at being poor folks. We need to show our visitor that we can be happy with little." The twins exchanged gleeful looks, already deep into their roles. Ben kicked at the dirt with his scuffed boots. "I reckon I can be plenty rowdy," he declared with a grin. "Lord help us all," Colton muttered, though he couldn't help but chuckle. He lifted Susanna into the wagon seat, then helped Ben scramble up beside her. The morning sun caught the dust motes dancing around them as they pulled away from the big house, heading toward the line shack several miles distant. The small cabin sat in a grove of cottonwoods near the creek. It was sturdy enough, though humble, just one room with a lean-to kitchen. Colton had used it himself in leaner days, before God blessed his efforts with prosperity. "First things first," he announced as they climbed down from the wagon. "This place needs a good sweeping." While the twins explored the cabin's corners, Colton set to work. He swept years of dust from the plank floor, stacked fresh-cut firewood by the stone hearth, and arranged their meager supplies on rough-hewn shelves. Anything too fine or new was carefully hidden away in the root cellar. "Now remember," he instructed as he hung a dented coffee pot over the fireplace, "we're testing our visitor's heart. We need to see if she can love a family that ain't blessed with much." "Can we practice being real wild?" Ben asked hopefully, already bouncing on the rope-strung bed. Susanna joined in, her usual shyness forgotten as she twirled around the room. "Like this?" She mimed spilling imaginary soup on her dress. "Just don't overdo it," Colton warned, though he struggled to keep a straight face. "We want to test her patience, not send her running for the hills." By early afternoon, the line shack looked properly lived in. Colton left the twins practicing their rowdy behavior and rode into town on his plainest horse, leaving his fine saddle behind in favor of a weathered one. The blacksmith's forge rang with steady strikes as Colton approached. He paid his bill with carefully counted coins instead of his usual paper notes, maintaining his role as a man of modest means. At the telegraph office, the afternoon sun slanted through dusty windows as Colton inquired about the stage's arrival. The clerk, busy with his clicking machine, paused to check his ledger. Let's see here. Yes, got word this morning. Stage is running on schedule, due in 3 days' time. The clerk adjusted his spectacles. Passenger manifest lists a Miss Christine Whitmore, schoolteacher from Kansas. Colton's heart quickened at the name. Much obliged, he said quietly, touching the brim of his hat. That evening, back at the line shack, he knelt beside his bedroll after the twins had fallen asleep. Their soft breathing mingled with the crackle of the dying fire as he bowed his head in prayer. Lord, he whispered, I know it ain't right to deceive, but my heart fears what wealth brings. These children need a mother who loves them true, not their inheritance. He paused, struggling with words that felt too heavy to speak. What if no woman could ever love both my fortune and my burdens? These twins, they're a mighty responsibility. Guide me, Father, in this test I've set. The night wind whispered through the cottonwoods outside, and somewhere in the darkness, a whippoorwill called. Colton remained on his knees, wrestling with his conscience as the last embers faded to ash. The late morning sun beat down on the dusty depot platform as townsfolk gathered, shielding their eyes against the glare. Children perched on wooden crates, while their mothers fanned themselves with folded papers, all waiting for the twice-weekly stage from Kansas. The distant rumble of wheels and jangling of harness grew steadily louder. Colton Hayes shifted his weight, conscious of the patched work shirt and weathered boots he'd chosen to wear. He'd left his fine horse at home, borrowing instead a plain wagon and team from his foreman. The twins fidgeted behind him, barely containing their excitement. Settle down now, he murmured, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. The stagecoach clattered into view, 4 horses straining against their traces as the driver guided them toward the depot. Dust billowed around the wheels, coating everything in a fine reddish powder. With a final lurch, the stage drew to a halt. The door swung open, and a woman emerged, accepting the driver's steadying hand. Christine Whitmore stood straight-backed on the platform, her dove-grey travelling dress crisp despite the journey. Though her clothes were simple, there was nothing common about her bearing. She held a small carpet bag close, her eyes scanning the crowd with quiet dignity. Colton drew a deep breath and stepped forward. Miss Whitmore? His voice came out rougher than intended. I'm Colton Hayes. He hesitated, the lie bitter on his tongue. Ranch hand at the double circle spread. Mr. Hayes. Christine's smile was reserved but genuine. If she felt any disappointment at his humble appearance, she hid it well. Thank you for meeting me. Before Colton could respond, Ben and Susanna darted out from behind him. They circled Christine like wild puppies, tugging at her skirts and chattering loudly. Are you going to be our new mama? Ben demanded, yanking harder than necessary. I want to see what's in your bag. Susanna reached for the carpet bag with grubby fingers. Instead of recoiling or scolding, Christine smoothly crouched down to their level, her skirts settling in the dust. Well now, you must be Ben and Susanna, she said warmly, meeting their startled eyes. Your uncle's letters told me all about you both. I heard you're quite the horsemen, Ben and Susanna. I understand you have a special way with the chickens. The twins fell silent, caught off guard by her knowledge of their names and favorite activities. They exchanged uncertain glances, their planned mischief temporarily forgotten. How do you know that? Ben asked, suspicion warring with curiosity in his voice. A good teacher always does her homework, Christine replied with a gentle wink. She straightened up, brushing dust from her skirts. Now then, shall we see this ranch of yours? Colton helped her into the wagon, noting how she settled herself without fuss on the rough bench. The twins scrambled up behind them, unusually quiet now, as they studied their potential new mother. As they rolled away from town, the vast prairie stretched before them under an endless blue sky. Colton pointed out landmarks along the rutted trail, the creek where they watered stock, the stand of cottonwoods that marked good grazing, the distant bluffs where coyotes denned. It ain't much, he said carefully, but the land's honest if you work it right. The best things often come from simple beginnings, Christine replied, her eyes on the horizon. Like mustard seeds. The biblical reference wasn't lost on Colton. He glanced at her profile, wondering what trials had given her such quiet strength. The sun was lowering by the time they reached the line shack. Christine took in the humble cabin without comment, though her eyes noted every detail: the swept yard, the stacked firewood, the attempt at tidiness despite obvious poverty. Inside, she set her carpet bag on the rough table and began unpacking with practical efficiency. "I'll just get settled, then see about supper," she said, removing a few carefully wrapped items. "I noticed some beans and flour in the kitchen. I make a fair bean soup if you've got an onion to spare." The twins drifted closer, watching as she revealed modest treasures: a small Bible, a packet of papers that must be schoolwork, a tin of peppermints. When she caught them looking, she smiled and held out the tin. "Would you like to help me cook?" she asked, after they'd each accepted a candy. "I could use someone strong to carry water, and someone clever to help me measure the flour." Ben and Susanna's suspicious faces began to soften with interest. Soon, they were helping her at the hearth, while she hummed an old hymn, her sure movements making the simple task seem almost like a dance. Colton leaned against the doorframe, watching. Something tight in his chest began to loosen as Christine demonstrated each step to the children, her patience never wavering. When Susanna spilled flour on her dress, Christine simply helped her brush it off, turning the moment into a lesson about fractions as they remeasured. Dawn crept through the line shack's single window, painting golden squares on the rough floorboards. The peaceful morning silence shattered as Ben and Susanna's voices rose in argument. "That's my side of the quilt!" Ben yanked at the worn blanket. "No, it ain't." Susanna pulled back harder. "You had more last night." Christine stirred from her pallet near the hearth, where she'd insisted on sleeping despite Colton's offer of the small bedroom. Instead of scolding the children, she sat up and began to sing in a clear, sweet voice. "This is the day. This is the day that the Lord has made." She gestured invitingly to the twins. The children paused mid-quarrel, staring at her with surprise. "Let us rejoice," Christine continued, patting the floor beside her. "Won't you help me remember the next part?" Ben shuffled closer, still clutching the quilt. "My mama used to sing that." "Mine too," Christine said softly. "Shall we sing it together?" Slowly the twins settled beside her. Their small voices joined hers, stumbling at first, then growing stronger. Soon giggles replaced grumbles as Christine added hand motions to the familiar scripture song. Colton watched from the doorway of the small bedroom, something warm and unexpected spreading through his chest. He'd forgotten how the cabin could sound with laughter in it. After the song, Christine rose and reached for the water bucket. "Time to fetch fresh water for breakfast," she announced cheerfully. "The well's not good," Susanna warned. "It makes Papa's arms shake something fierce." Christine examined the worn rope and weathered pulley system with practical eyes. "Well then, we'll just have to be extra careful, won't we?" She gripped the rope firmly and began lowering the bucket. Though the bucket was heavy when full, she hauled it up without complaint, only a slight flush in her cheeks betraying the effort. The water sloshed against the wooden sides as she carried it inside, spilling not a drop. Breakfast was simple fare. Yesterday's cornbread warmed on the stove, beans reheated with care. But Christine arranged the humble food on their tin plates with surprising grace, adding sprigs of wild mint she'd spotted by the well. She'd even shaped the last of the cornbread into rough hearts for the twins. "Ain't much of a meal," Colton said gruffly, watching her work. "The Lord can multiply our smallest offerings," Christine replied, her smile gentle. "Besides, good company makes any meal a feast." After the dishes were cleared and morning chores completed, Christine stood in the packed earth of the yard, studying the ground thoughtfully. She picked up a sturdy stick and began scratching letters in the dirt. "Who can tell me what this spells?" she asked the twins, who were watching with poorly concealed interest. don't want no lessons," Ben protested, kicking at a clump of grass. "It's too hot for learning." "Oh, this isn't a lesson," Christine said, continuing to draw. "This is a game. See here? I've written treasure. Now, if you can read 3 more words I write, I'll tell you a story about real buried treasure from back in Kansas." Susanna edged closer. Then Ben followed. Soon they were sounding out words together, their resistance melting as Christine wove the promise of stories through their learning. As evening approached and supper dishes were cleared away, Christine sat in the doorway, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of purple and gold. The twins had finally worn themselves out and were sleeping on their shared pallet. "You've got away with them," Colton said quietly, settling onto the rough-hewn bench beside her. "Were your students in Kansas as lively?" A fond smile touched Christine's lips. "Some were. I had 23 pupils in that little schoolhouse, ages 6 to 16. Her expression grew distant. "We didn't have much, just a few books, some slates, and plenty of determination. But those children were so eager to learn." "Why'd you leave?" Colton asked, noting how she tensed at the question. Christine's fingers worried at her skirt hem. "Sometimes," she began, then fell silent. When she spoke again, her voice was carefully neutral. "Sometimes standing up for what's right comes at a cost." She turned away, but not before Colton caught the shadow of old pain in her eyes. Whatever had driven her from Kansas, the wound was still fresh. Later, as lamplight cast warm shadows on the cabin walls, Colton watched Christine mending one of Susanna's dresses. Her needle moved steadily, but her eyes held that same haunted look. Yet despite the secrets she carried, her presence had already transformed the bare little shack. The twins slept peacefully, their faces relaxed in ways he hadn't seen in months. Even the air felt different, warmer somehow, touched with the first whispers of home. A week settled into gentle rhythm at the line shack. Each morning brought the same comforting routine. Christine rising early to kindle the fire, the twins stumbling sleepily from their pallet, and Colton returning from his dawn check of the few cattle they kept nearby. Today, Colton hitched the wagon for his weekly supply run to town. "Need anything particular?" he asked Christine, who stood in the doorway with a patching basket. "Just thread if you can manage it," she replied, holding up Susanna's torn dress. This one's had quite a journey. The dress had suffered from Susanna's latest adventure, climbing the oak tree behind the shack. Christine had rescued it from becoming cleaning rags, insisting it just needed patience and careful mending. As Colton's wagon disappeared into the distance, Christine settled into the day's work. She hummed softly while teaching Ben to sweep the packed dirt floor, showing him how to dampen the broom first to keep the dust down. "Like this, Miss Christine?" Ben asked, his small face serious with concentration. "That's exactly right," she praised. "You're becoming quite the helper." Susanna sat nearby, watching Christine's needle weave invisible stitches along the dress's torn seam. "Mama used to sew like that," she said quietly. "All tiny and neat." Christine's hand stilled for a moment. "Your mama taught you well, then. Would you like to learn?" The afternoon sun dimmed as clouds gathered in the west, promising a storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Christine worked with the children. She showed Susanna how to thread a needle while Ben proudly swept every corner. The first heavy drops pelted the roof when Colton returned, rushing to get the horses settled before the storm broke. Inside, he found Christine standing at the window, her face troubled as she watched the darkening sky. "Storm's coming strong," he said, setting down his purchases. "But we're snug enough here." Christine wrapped her arms around herself, as if chilled despite the warm air. "Mr. Hayes," she said softly, "there's something I need to tell you." The twins were absorbed in their tasks, but Christine moved closer to Colton, lowering her voice. "I wasn't entirely honest about why I came west." Colton's heart tightened. Here it was, the truth he'd been testing for, though not the kind he'd expected. "I didn't come only seeking marriage," she continued. "I'm running from someone, a railroad agent named Jeb Carter." Lightning flashed outside, illuminating her pale face. "Back in Kansas, I witnessed things, terrible things. Carter and his men were seizing land from widows, from veterans, anyone too weak to fight back. They forged documents, spread lies, forced people out with no compensation." "You spoke up?" Colton asked, though he already knew the answer from the steel in her spine. Christine nodded. "I was going to testify. Carter found out. He ... She swallowed hard. "He said he'd destroy me if I didn't stay quiet. Said no one would believe a woman's word against the railroads anyway." Thunder cracked overhead, making the shack's timbers creak. Colton's hands clenched, thinking of his own dealings with railroad men, the power his wealth had given him to fight them off. Power he was hiding from her. "He'll never find you here," he said firmly, pushing down his guilt. "This is just a small ranch, far from anywhere important." The lie tasted bitter, but he told himself it was still protecting her. "I pray you're right," Christine whispered. "I couldn't bear to bring trouble to you and the children." The storm broke in earnest then, rain drumming on the roof like 1,000 hooves. Wind howled through the cracks in the walls, making the lamp flames dance. "Time for evening prayers," Christine called to the twins, her voice steady despite her earlier fear. They gathered around the table, heads bowed. "Dear Lord," Christine began, "we thank you for this shelter from the storm, for keeping us safe and together." Her hand found Susanna's small one on one side, Ben's on the other. "Watch over us through the night. Protect us from all harm, seen and unseen." "Amen," the twins echoed solemnly. Colton stood apart, watching this woman who had brought such gentle strength into their lives, who had run from real danger, yet spent her days teaching children to sweep floors and mend dresses, who had chosen what was right over what was safe. The guilt of his deception weighed heavier than ever. Here she was, trusting them with her dangerous secret, while he played at poverty to test her character. Yet how could he tell her now, when she had fled one wealthy man's threats, when she finally felt safe in this humble shack? Lightning flashed again, thunder following close behind. The twins pressed closer to Christine, who began singing softly to distract them from the storm's fury. Her voice rose clear and true above the rain, carrying a hymn of protection and peace. Morning dawned bright after the storm, the prairie washed clean. Puddles dotted the rutted road as Colton hitched the wagon for the ride to Sunday service. Christine emerged from the shack wearing her freshly mended dress, her hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet. The twins scrambled up beside her, their faces scrubbed pink and clothes as tidy as ranch children could manage. "Ready for church?" Colton asked, offering his hand to help her up. Her fingers were warm despite the morning chill, and he found himself holding on a moment longer than necessary. The small clapboard church sat on the edge of town, its white paint gleaming in the morning sun. As they approached, Christine straightened her shoulders, though Colton noticed her hands tightening in her lap. Townsfolk gathered on the steps, their curious glances following the wagon's arrival. "Miss Christine, will you sit with us?" Susanna pleaded, tugging at her skirt as they dismounted. "Of course, dear." Christine smiled, keeping the children close as they climbed the wooden steps. Pastor Graves stood at the door, his weathered face creasing with welcome. "You must be Miss Whitmore," he said warmly. "We're blessed to have you join us today." "Thank you, Pastor." Christine's voice was clear and steady, despite the whispers that followed them inside. The congregation settled into rough-hewn pews as morning light streamed through simple windows. When Pastor Graves called for the opening hymn, he gestured to Christine. "I hear you have experience leading songs of praise?" Color touched Christine's cheeks, but she rose gracefully. Her voice lifted pure and strong in amazing grace, and soon the whole church joined in, the twins singing loudly beside her. Colton watched her face transform with joy as she led the music, all trace of fear forgotten in worship. After the service, while Christine helped the children collect their Bibles, Colton found himself near a group of men discussing the latest news. "Railroad's pushing west again," old Jim Turner was saying. "Buying up land all through Kansas, heading this way. Heard they sent an agent ahead." Another added, "Fellow named Carter, real smooth talker but hard as nails underneath." Colton's chest tightened. He glanced at Christine, still safely distracted by the children, but the threat of Carter's approach lay heavy on his mind as they loaded the wagon for home. The ride back was quiet, broken only by the twins' chatter. Christine gazed across the endless plains, golden grass rippling in the wind beneath an impossibly blue sky. "It's so vast," she murmured, "like an ocean of land." "Plenty of space to disappear," Colton offered, trying to reassure her. A shadow crossed her face. "Not vast enough sometimes." She pulled her shawl tighter despite the warm afternoon. Back at the shack, Christine busied herself preparing their Sunday supper. The twins helped fetch water and set their humble table, working together without their usual squabbles. The simple meal of beans, cornbread, and dried apple pie tasted like a feast, filled with easy conversation and children's laughter. As twilight settled over the prairie, Ben tugged at Christine's sleeve. "Tell us a story, please." "A Bible story," Susanna added quickly. "Like Pastor Graves told." Christine settled in the rocking chair, gathering the children close. "Did you know there was once a man who had to face lions?" she began, her voice taking on a storyteller's rhythm. Colton pretended to mend harness while he listened, watching how she brought Daniel's courage to life for the children. Her faith shone through every word as she described his trust in God's protection. "The lions could not harm Daniel," she told them, "because he believed with all his heart that God would keep him safe. No matter how dark that den became, he knew he wasn't alone." The twins' eyes were heavy by the time she finished. Colton helped her tuck them into their pallet, their small faces peaceful in the lamplight. Long after Christine retired to her curtained corner, Colton lay awake on his bedroll. The evening's warmth twisted into guilt in his stomach. Every day, her genuine kindness and faith made his deception harder to bear. She trusted them with her fears, while he played at poverty to test her heart. The truth about his wealth could protect her from Carter, his land, his influence, his resources. Yet the thought of revealing his lies now, when she'd found safety in their simple life, made him ache with shame. Through the window, stars scattered across the velvet sky like grains of salt on dark cloth. Somewhere out there, Carter was coming. And Colton would have to choose between maintaining his test of character and protecting the woman who was slowly claiming his heart. The days settled into a gentle rhythm at the line shack, each sunrise bringing new moments of quiet joy. Christine sat with the twins each morning after breakfast, their heads bent over a worn Bible as she helped them memorize verses. Her finger traced the well-loved words while Ben and Susanna repeated after her. "Love thy neighbor as thyself," they recited together, their young voices earnest. "That's wonderful," Christine praised, closing the book carefully. "Now, who wants to help me bake bread?" The twins scrambled to assist, even though their flour bin held barely enough for 2 loaves. Christine showed them how to knead the dough, her capable hands guiding theirs through the motions. The scent of baking bread soon filled the small space, making it feel more like home with each passing day. One afternoon, Colton noticed water dripping through the shack's roof during a light rain. Without hesitation, Christine gathered her skirts and climbed up beside him to help repair it. She handed him tools and held boards steady, her determination matching his own. "Reckon you're handier than most school teachers," Colton said, watching her nail down a loose shingle. She smiled, wiping sweat from her brow. A frontier teacher learns to fix what needs fixing. That evening, Colton disappeared briefly to the storage shed and returned with something wrapped in oilcloth. Christine's eyes brightened when he revealed the old fiddle. "Oh, do you play?" she asked eagerly. "Not a note," he admitted. "It was my sister's, but she—" His voice trailed off. "May I?" Christine asked softly, understanding in her eyes. She took the instrument with reverent hands, testing the strings and adjusting them with careful turns. The first notes were hesitant, but soon a sweet melody filled the shack. The twins looked up from their quiet play by the hearth, faces glowing. "Dance with me, Ben," Susanna called, pulling her brother to his feet. They kicked off their worn boots and spun across the packed dirt floor, their laughter mixing with the music. Christine's fingers flew faster, playing a lively reel that had the children skipping and twirling. Colton leaned against the doorframe, his heart so full it hurt. The sight of them together, Christine with his sister's fiddle, the twins dancing with pure joy, created a picture of family he had hardly dared to dream about. Later, as Christine walked to the water trough to wash the supper dishes, Colton fell into step beside her. The evening air was sweet with spring grass, and lightning bugs blinked in the gathering dusk. Words rose in his throat, the truth about his wealth, his testing of her character, his growing feelings. But fear held them back. Would she see his deception as betrayal? Would knowing his true station drive her away, just when they had found this delicate happiness? The next day, Colton rode into town for supplies. At the general store, he overheard conversations that chilled his blood. "Carter's been spotted in Sterling," the storekeeper told a group of ranchers. "Making his way west, they say, putting pressure on folks to sell cheap to the railroad." "Heard he's got papers that ain't exactly honest," another man added darkly. "But who's got money to fight him in court?" Colton gripped the counter hard. He had the money, more than enough to stand against Carter, but using it would reveal everything to Christine. That night, after the twins were asleep, and Christine had retired behind her curtain, Colton slipped outside. The stars spread across the dark sky like scattered diamonds, witnesses to his troubled heart. He knelt in the cool grass, hands clasped tight. "Lord," he whispered, "give me wisdom. Show me the right path." The spring wind carried his prayer across the empty prairie. If I tell her now, will she understand? Or will my lies drive her away forever? The only answer was the distant cry of a coyote and the rustle of grass. Inside the shack, he could hear Christine's soft breathing behind her curtain. She trusted them, had opened her heart to share their simple life. She brought music and scripture and gentle guidance to his sister's children. And now Carter's shadow loomed closer, threatening everything they had built. Colton remained on his knees, wrestling with his conscience as the night deepened around him. The truth about his wealth could protect her, give her security against Carter's threats. But would the cost be her trust, her genuine affection that had grown in their shared work and simple pleasures? The answer eluded him as the stars wheeled slowly overhead. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie as Colton worked the fence line, his muscles aching from driving posts into the hard ground. The steady rhythm of his work broke when he heard thundering hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, he saw young Tommy from the general store galloping toward him, dust billowing behind his horse. "Mr. Hayes." Tommy reined his horse to a stop, breathing hard. "Had to ride out straight away. He's here. That railroad man, Carter, just rode into town not an hour ago." Colton's hammer fell forgotten to the ground. He glanced toward the line shack where Christine was hanging laundry while the twins played nearby with stick horses. "Did he say why he's here?" Colton kept his voice steady, though his heart pounded. Talking about railroad business, buying up land. But he was asking questions too, about newcomers, especially any women newly arrived from Kansas. Colton nodded grimly. "Much obliged for the warning, Tommy. Best head on back now." He gathered his tools quickly and strode toward the shack. Christine looked up as he approached, her face going pale when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" she asked, clutching a damp sheet to her chest. "Carter's in town," Colton said quietly, so the twins wouldn't hear. "Just arrived today." The sheet slipped from Christine's trembling fingers. "No," she whispered. "He followed me, all this way." "Now don't panic." Colton steadied her with a gentle hand on her arm. "We're miles from town here. He doesn't know about this place." "But he'll ask questions. He always finds what he's looking for." Fear made her voice shake. "We'll be safe for now," Colton assured her, though his own worry gnawed at him. "Let's get supper ready and keep things normal for the children." Inside the shack, Christine moved mechanically through the familiar routine of cooking. She stirred the pot of stew hanging over the fire, but her hands trembled as she seasoned it with the last of their dried herbs. The twins sat at the rough table, oblivious to the tension as they argued over who would get the biggest biscuit. "Miss Christine, tell Ben to stop stealing my share," Susanna complained. "I'm not! You always get more anyway!" Ben protested. "Hush now, both of you." Christine managed a smile as she ladled stew into their bowls. "There's plenty for everyone." The familiar scents of beef, potatoes, and wood smoke filled the small space, but Christine barely touched her portion. Colton watched her push the food around her bowl, noting how her hand shook slightly with each movement. After supper, the twins grew sleepy by the fire. Christine tucked them into their bed in the corner, singing a soft hymn until their breathing settled into the deep rhythm of sleep. Only then did she sink into a chair by the lamp, her shoulders sagging with the weight of her fears. Colton pulled his chair closer, keeping his voice low. "Tell me true. What worries you most about Carter?" Christine twisted her hands in her lap. "He's clever with words and papers. Back in Kansas, when I spoke up about his schemes, he threatened to prove me a liar. Said he'd make sure no one would believe my testimony about the land seizures." She looked up, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I had to leave my school, my home. If he does the same here—" The lamp flickered, casting shadows across her face. Colton's chest tightened with the urge to tell her everything about his wealth, his influence, his power to protect her. One word from him could set a team of lawyers against Carter. Instead, he reached across and covered her trembling hands with his calloused one. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I may be just a poor ranch hand, but I swear on my life I won't let him harm you or your reputation." Their eyes met in the lamplight, and something electric passed between them. Christine's fingers curled around his, holding on like a lifeline. The moment stretched, filled with words neither dared to speak. A coyote's lonely howl drifted through the night, making them both start. Christine withdrew her hand slowly, but her eyes stayed on his face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Sometimes I forget what it's like, not having to face troubles alone." Colton nodded, his throat tight with emotion and unspoken truths. Outside, another coyote answered the first, their wild songs echoing across the darkened prairie. Inside the shack, the twins slept on peacefully, while two hearts beat with shared fear and growing feelings neither could fully express. Morning sunlight painted the prairie grass gold as Colton saddled his horse. He'd told Christine he needed supplies in town, but his real purpose was to learn what Carter was plotting. The twins waved from the doorway of the shack as he rode off, their small faces bright with trust that made his heart ache. The town bustled with its usual morning activity, wagons creaking past the general store, women carrying baskets to market, cowboys leading their mounts to water. But there was an undercurrent of tension Colton could feel as he dismounted in front of the saloon. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco smoke and whispered conversations. Jeb Carter held court at a corner table, his expensive suit setting him apart from the working men around him. A half-empty whiskey bottle stood before him as he gestured broadly, his voice carrying across the room. "You should have seen how quick that schoolmarm ran when I exposed her lies," Carter boasted, pouring another round for his audience. "Claiming we were cheating honest folks out of their land. But she couldn't prove a thing once I got through with her." Colton's fists clenched at his sides. He moved closer to the bar, pretending interest in ordering while he listened. "Heard she headed west." one of Carter's companions remarked. Looking for fresh marks to fool, no doubt. Carter's laugh was ugly. Won't get far. Railroad's got a long reach, and we don't forget those who cross us. The malice in his voice made Colton's jaw tighten. He wanted nothing more than to confront the man, but that would only draw attention to Christine. Instead, he left the saloon, his boots striking the wooden sidewalk with controlled force. When he returned to the shack, the peaceful scene before him was like a balm to his anger. Christine sat with the twins at the rough table, helping them form letters in the flour she'd scattered across the surface. Susanna's tongue poked out in concentration as she traced an S, while Ben proudly showed off his B. "How was town?" Christine asked, looking up with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "The twins need more water from the well," Colton said quietly. Once the children had scampered outside with their bucket, he met Christine's worried gaze. "Carter's at the saloon, spreading his poison, making sure everyone knows his version of what happened in Kansas." Christine's hands twisted in her apron. What is he saying?" "Nothing worth repeating," Colton said firmly. "But we need to be prepared. He's not here by chance." Before Christine could respond, hoofbeats approached the shack. The twins ran inside, their water forgotten as a shadow fell across the doorway. Jeb Carter filled the frame, his elegant clothes dusty from riding. Well, well," he drawled, eyes fixing on Christine. "Quite a coincidence finding you here." The twins pressed against Christine's skirts as she stood, chin lifted despite her trembling hands. "This is private property, Mr. Carter." "Private property?" Carter's laugh was sharp. "This tumble-down shack, fitting company for a fraud like you?" His gaze swept the humble room with contempt. "Still playing teacher, I see. Wonder what these good people would think if they knew the truth about you." Colton stepped between them, his voice low and dangerous. "You're not welcome here." Carter barely spared him a glance. "Stand aside, ranch hand. This doesn't concern you." He focused again on Christine. "I'm feeling generous today. You have until sundown tomorrow to disappear. After that, well..." His smile showed teeth. "I'd hate to see another town turn against you." "You can't threaten me anymore," Christine said, though her voice shook. "I know what I saw in Kansas, what you did to those families." Brave words from a woman with no proof and no standing. Carter touched the brim of his hat mockingly. "Sundown tomorrow. Don't make me come back here." He turned and strode out, his laugh drifting behind him. The twins clung to Christine, their eyes wide with fear. "Is the bad man going to hurt us?" Susanna whispered. "No, sweetheart." Christine gathered them close. "No one's going to hurt you." Later, after the children were asleep, Christine stood by the window, staring into the darkness. Colton joined her, fury still burning in his chest at Carter's threats. "I won't let him drive you away," he said softly. Christine wrapped her arms around herself. "You don't know what he's capable of. The way he turned an entire town against me made them believe I was the liar." "You're not alone this time." Colton touched her shoulder gently. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." She leaned slightly into his touch, drawing strength from his presence. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the weight of tomorrow's deadline with it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street as Christine walked toward town, her steps measured and deliberate. The twins bounced alongside her, their small hands clutching her skirts. Colton followed close behind, his weathered hat pulled low against the glare. At the mercantile's worn wooden steps, Christine paused, drawing a deep breath. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, announcing their presence to the handful of customers inside. Conversation died like a snuffed candle. "Look at her, bold as brass," a woman whispered behind her fan. "After what Mr. Carter said about her troublemaking in Kansas..." Christine kept her chin high, though her cheeks burned. She guided the twins toward the penny candy display, pretending not to notice how Mrs. Thompson hustled her daughter to the far side of the store. "Morning, Miss Whitmore," the shopkeeper said stiffly, no trace of his usual warmth. "Good morning, Mr. Peters," Christine replied steadily. "We need flour and coffee, please." Colton stepped forward, his presence solid and reassuring. "Add some sugar too," he said quietly. "For the children." As Mr. Peters gathered their items, more whispers drifted through the store. "Stirring up trouble about the railroad. Probably best if she moves on." Ben tugged at Christine's sleeve. "Why are they talking mean, Mama?" he asked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Christine's heart caught at the word Mama, but she kept her voice steady. "Sometimes people believe things that aren't true, sweetheart. We just have to be patient and kind anyway." Sarah Miller, a young widow, offered Christine a hesitant smile as she approached the counter with her own meager purchases. When Mr. Peters named the total, Sarah's face fell. "I'm sorry, I thought I had enough." Christine saw Colton slip behind the counter while Sarah was gathering her things. His whispered exchange with Mr. Peters was brief, but when Sarah returned, the shopkeeper smiled. "No worry, Mrs. Miller. Seems your account's been settled." Later that afternoon, they made their way to the white-painted church for midweek service. Pastor Graves stood at the door, greeting his flock with firm handshakes and warm words. His eyes crinkled kindly when he saw Christine. "Miss Whitmore," he said, voice carrying clearly. "The Lord brings good souls to us in His own time." Inside, they settled into a pew near the front. Jeb Carter's arrival caused a stir, his expensive boots clicking on the wooden floor as he took a seat in the back row. The twins pressed closer to Christine, Susanna whispering, "The bad man's here, Mama." Christine's heart swelled again at the word, even as she felt Carter's cold stare on her back. Pastor Graves opened his Bible, but instead of beginning his sermon, he raised his hands. "Today we have special cause to pray. The Lord commands us to welcome strangers, for in doing so, some have entertained angels unaware." His steady gaze found Christine. "Miss Whitmore, would you join me?" Christine rose on trembling legs. The twins clung to her hands as she walked to the front. Pastor Graves placed a weathered hand on her shoulder. "Lord," he prayed, voice strong and clear, "we ask your blessing on this daughter who has come among us. Give us wisdom to judge righteous judgment, not by appearance or rumor, but by the fruits of your Spirit we see in her life. Protect her and these precious children in her care." Through tear-blurred eyes, Christine saw Carter rise and stalk out, letting the door slam behind him. But others in the congregation murmured, "Amen." And Mrs. Thompson looked ashamed of her earlier behavior. That evening, back at the humble shack, Christine stirred a pot of beans while the twins set their simple table. The day's emotions caught up with her as she remembered their sweet voices calling her Mama for the first time. "Mama, is the stew ready?" Susanna asked, hugging Christine's waist. "Almost ready, sweetheart," Christine answered, her voice thick with tears. "Don't cry, Mama," Ben said, joining the embrace. "We love you." Colton watched from the doorway, his heart full to bursting. The sight of Christine holding his sister's children, their love for her so pure and trusting, made his deception feel like a stone in his chest. He longed to tell her everything, about his wealth, his grand house, his ability to protect her from Carter's threats. But fear held his tongue. What if the truth destroyed this precious moment? What if she could never forgive his lies? The twins' laughter filled the small space as Christine wiped her eyes and hugged them close. "I love you too," she whispered. "So very much." Outside, the setting sun painted the prairie sky in shades of gold and purple, while inside the humble shack, a family's love bloomed despite secrets and shadows. The morning sun had barely touched the town's dusty main street when Jeb Carter's expensive carriage rolled in, its polished wheels gleaming. He stepped down holding a leather portfolio, his smirk visible even from a distance. A small crowd gathered as he strode toward the mercantile, where Colton and Christine were purchasing supplies for the shack. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carter called out, his voice carrying across the street. "I believe it's time for some truth-telling in this fine town." He pulled documents from his portfolio, waving them overhead. "These records show something quite interesting about our friend, Mr. Hayes." Colton froze in the doorway of the store, his heart pounding. Christine stood beside him, the twins clutching her skirts as usual. "It seems Mr. Hayes here isn't the poor ranch hand he's been pretending to be." Carter's voice dripped with mock sincerity. "No, these bank records and property deeds show he's one of the wealthiest cattlemen in the territory." Gasps rippled through the growing crowd. Mrs. Thompson covered her mouth with her hand. The shopkeeper, Mr. Peters, stepped out onto his porch, frowning deeply. "That's right," Carter continued, clearly savoring the moment. "Owner of the Double H Ranch, 3,000 head of cattle, and that fine big house up on the North Ridge. Been playing poor in that line shack, testing this lady teacher here like she was some kind of entertainment." Christine's face drained of color. She turned to Colton, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Is it true?" Colton's throat went dry. "Christine, please, let me explain. He's been having quite a laugh at your expense, Miss Whitmore." Carter interrupted, his voice carrying across the silent street. "Living in that shabby shack, cooking with scraps, while all along he could have given you every comfort." "Stop it!" Colton growled, stepping forward. But Carter wasn't finished. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, how does it feel to be his little experiment? To have him test your character while deceiving you about his own—" Christine stumbled backward, pressing one hand to her chest. Tears welled in her eyes as understanding dawned. "All this time," she whispered, "the poor conditions, the simple meals, the hard work, it was all a test." "Christine, no." Colton reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "It wasn't like that. I needed to know. If I was after your money?" Her voice cracked. "So you lied to me? Made me think." She closed her eyes, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I trusted you." The twins looked between them, confusion clear on their small faces. "Mama," Susanna's voice quavered, "why are you crying?" "I'm not your mama," Christine said softly, her heart breaking. "I'm just someone your uncle was testing, like a horse at market." Ben started to cry, and Susanna soon followed. Their sobs cut through Colton like knives, but Christine's silence hurt worse. "I'll get my things," she said, her voice hollow. She turned and walked toward the wagon, her back straight despite her tears. The crowd parted silently, watching as she climbed up. Carter's satisfied chuckle echoed in the quiet street. "Well, Mr. Hayes, seems your little game has ended, though I must say it was quite entertaining." Colton's fists clenched at his sides, but he couldn't strike out, not with the twins watching, not with Christine's pain so raw and real before him. He helped the crying children into the wagon and drove them back to the shack in heavy silence. Christine packed quickly, folding her few belongings into the same small carpet bag she'd arrived with. The twins hugged her legs, begging her not to go, but she gently disentangled herself. "I'm sorry, little ones," she whispered, touching each of their faces one last time. "But I can't stay where there's no trust." She walked out of the shack without looking back. Colton watched helplessly as she disappeared down the road toward town, her figure growing smaller until she vanished in the distance. The twins cried themselves to sleep that evening, their small bodies exhausted from grief. Colton sat alone in the shack afterward, the lamplight casting weak shadows on the walls. The room felt colder somehow, emptier. All the moments they'd shared here, the songs, the laughter, the quiet evenings, seemed tainted now by his deception. He picked up the fiddle she'd played, remembering how her music had filled this humble space with joy. Now it sat silent in his hands, as powerless as he felt. For the first time since his sister's death, since taking on the responsibility of the twins and building his cattle empire, Colton Hayes had no idea what to do next. The lamp burned low, its dim light matching the darkness in his heart. Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, but inside the shack, only silence remained. Silence and the crushing weight of truth revealed too late. Dawn crept across the prairie in shades of pewter and steel, the sun hidden behind a blanket of clouds that matched Christine's heavy heart. She walked slowly along the rutted road toward town, her carpet-bag light in her hand, but her spirit weighed down by betrayal. The morning dew had soaked the hem of her skirts, and a chill wind whipped at her shawl. Behind her came the sound of running feet and sniffling breaths. "Miss Christine, Mama, please." Susanna's voice cracked with tears. Ben joined in, their combined pleas cutting straight to her heart. "Don't go!" Christine paused, closing her eyes against fresh tears. She turned to face the twins, their small faces red and streaked with crying. Kneeling down, she gathered them close one last time. "Sweet ones," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You need to go back to your uncle now. He'll take good care of you." "But we want you." Ben wrapped his arms around her neck, clinging tight. "I know, darling." She pressed a kiss to his temple, then Susanna's. "But sometimes grown-ups make choices that hurt, even when they don't mean to. Now go on back, please." She stood, gently disentangling herself from their grip, and pointed them toward home. The twins reluctantly turned back, their shoulders slumped in defeat. Through her tears, she glimpsed Colton's familiar figure in the distance, following at a respectful distance. The sight of him sent fresh pain through her chest. The walk to the depot seemed endless. Early morning traders and shopkeepers paused in their work to watch her pass, their faces a mixture of pity and curiosity. Christine held her head high, despite the whispers that followed in her wake. At the depot, the station master was just opening up, the screech of his key in the lock cutting through the morning quiet. A few passengers already waited on the wooden platform, stamping their feet against the chill. Christine approached the ticket window, reaching for the few coins she had left. "Well, well." Jeb Carter's oily voice carried across the platform. "Leaving us so soon, Miss Whitmore?" He emerged from the shadows of the depot's overhang, looking pleased with himself. His boots clicked on the wooden planks as he approached. "I must say this has worked out better than I'd hoped." He smirked, adjusting his fine leather gloves. "Not only did you lose your position in Kansas, but now you've been thoroughly humiliated here as well. That should teach you to mind your own business about railroad affairs." Christine's spine stiffened, but before she could respond, heavy footsteps sounded on the platform. Colton strode forward, his work clothes dusty and worn, his head bare in the morning light. His face showed nothing of the wealthy rancher Carter had exposed, only a man stripped to his honest core. The entire town seemed to hold its breath as he walked straight to where Christine stood. Behind him, a small crowd had gathered, drawn by the drama unfolding at the depot. "Christine," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "please hear me out before you go." She turned partially away, but he continued speaking, his words carrying clearly across the platform. "What Carter said yesterday was true. I am wealthy. I own the Double H Ranch and everything that goes with it." He swallowed hard. "But I've learned that wealth can poison a man's chances at real happiness. Every woman who came before you only saw the size of my herd, the fine house, the bank accounts." The crowd pressed closer, straining to hear. Even Carter stood silent, his smirk fading. "I needed to find someone who could love me and the twins for who we are, not what we own." Colton's voice cracked. "Someone who would show patience with unruly children, who would work hard without complaint, who would bring music and laughter into a humble home." Christine's shoulders trembled, but she didn't turn. "You did all that and more," he continued. "You taught the twins with love. You faced down Carter's threats with courage. You filled our lives with joy, not because of any wealth, but because that's who you are." He took a step closer, his voice dropping lower. "I was wrong to deceive you. My pride and fear led me to test you, when I should have trusted in God to lead me to the right woman. I would give up every acre, every head of cattle, every penny in the bank, if it meant earning back your trust. The station master's bell rang, signaling the approaching stage, but nobody moved. The entire town waited, watching as Colton laid his heart bare before them all. "I'm asking your forgiveness, Christine, not as a wealthy rancher, but as a foolish man who let fear override faith. A man who sees now that true riches have nothing to do with money and everything to do with love." The stagecoach rumbled into view down the street, its approach breaking the heavy silence that had fallen over the platform. The town held its collective breath, waiting to see what Christine would do. Carter's laugh cut through the tense morning air. How touching. The wealthy rancher plays poor to toy with a simple school teacher? He adjusted his silk vest with a sneer. Just proves what I've been saying about her judgment all along. That's quite enough, Mr. Carter. Pastor Graves's steady voice rang out as he stepped onto the platform. The leather satchel in his hands caught Carter's eye, making him pause mid-sneer. "What's this?" Carter demanded. The pastor pulled out a stack of official papers, their government seals gleaming in the morning light. Legal documents, filed last month by Mr. Hayes, protecting every homesteader's claim in this territory from railroad seizure. He held them up for all to see. Seems our supposedly selfish rancher has been quietly using his wealth to defend his neighbors. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Christine's eyes widened as she turned to face Colton fully for the first time. "He paid for every legal filing himself," Pastor Graves continued. "Protected dozens of families from losing their land to your schemes, Mr. Carter." The townsfolk began to cheer, understanding dawning on their faces. Colton hadn't been flaunting his wealth or mocking the poor. He'd been their silent guardian all along. Christine's hands trembled as she stepped toward Colton. "You weren't testing me to be cruel," she whispered. "You were protecting your heart. And now you hold it completely," he answered softly. She squared her shoulders, turning to face Carter. "Your lies have no power here anymore. This community stands together." Carter's face twisted with rage, but before he could speak, 2 deputies appeared at his sides. "Time for you to leave, Mr. Carter," they said firmly. "Don't come back." As Carter was led away, the church bells began to ring. That evening, lantern light spilled from the chapel windows as the whole town gathered inside. Colton walked down the aisle to where Christine stood near the altar. Without hesitation, he dropped to one knee. "Christine Whitmore," he said, his voice clear and strong, "will you marry me? Not for my wealth or my land, but for my heart." Tears sparkled in her eyes as she smiled. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." The twins burst into delighted applause, running to embrace them both as the congregation cheered. Their family, tested by trials but strengthened by truth, was finally complete. The following Sunday dawned clear and bright. The church bells' peals echoed across the prairie, calling everyone to witness love made new. Sunlight streamed through the chapel's windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden pews filled with smiling faces. Susanna and Ben stood proudly in their Sunday best, their faces scrubbed clean and hair carefully combed. Their small hands held tight to Christine's as she faced Colton before Pastor Graves. Her simple white dress caught the morning light, but her eyes shone brighter still. Pastor Graves's weathered voice carried through the chapel as he spoke of faith, family, and the bonds of trust. Colton's voice was steady and sure as he made his vows, promising to cherish Christine in plenty or want, just as they had already proven. When Christine spoke her promises in return, happy tears sparkled in her eyes. After the ceremony, the celebration spilled out into the churchyard. Lanterns swayed in the gentle breeze as neighbors shared dishes from their kitchens, fresh-baked bread, roasted chicken, and sweet pies. Fiddle music filled the air as folks danced and laughed. Christine twirled with the twins, their giggles rising above the music. Her fear and loneliness had melted away, replaced by the warmth of belonging. Between dances, Colton drew her close. "Whether we live in that little shack or the big house," he whispered, "our home will always be built on truth and faith." As evening settled over the gathering, Christine sat quietly with the twins curled in her lap, their eyes heavy with sleep. She gazed up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, offering a silent prayer of gratitude. God had turned her flight into freedom, her fears into courage, and given her a family to call her own. The twins drifted off to sleep against her shoulder, finally and fully secure in their mother's love. If today's story echoed in your heart, I hope you'll stick around. Subscribe, and I'll be here again tomorrow, with another story that speaks softly but stays deeply.